Hello, my name's Richard Felix, and I'm going to take you on a tour of haunted London. Over the past 10 years, I've been leading ghost tours around some of the most haunted sites in Great Britain. Some of the stories that you're going to hear are of real ghosts, of entities, souls and spirits that are still trapped on this earth and waiting for whatever reason to be released. Others are to do with recordings from traumatic, tragic death, such as murders, suicides, battles, accidents and executions. And of course, London has had more than its fair share of all of these. I believe the energy used by the body in resisting death can be so immense that the event just before death can be recorded into the fabric of a building, and then for some reason, either the anniversary or from some person that is more susceptible to seeing or hearing things, it's replayed to them, they see it again. What better place to start this tour of London than here at the top of Pall Mall, outside Buckingham Palace. Although, of course, the seat of royalty for hundreds of years. Before that, in medieval times, on the site of Buckingham Palace was a priory, and there is a ghost of a monk, always seen on the grand terrace at the back, often either on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. Sometimes it's also seen wandering in the gardens at the back. He was, for some reason, locked in a punishment cell underneath the old priory before the dissolution of the monasteries, and died there. Fortunately, his ghost has not been seen for many years. Either that, or of course, it's been hushed up. There's also another ghostly goings on in one of the corridors. On infrequent occasions, a ghostly shot is heard, and it's believed to be a reenactment of the suicide of King Edward VII's valet, who blew his brains out inside the palace. Can you imagine what consternation and panic that causes within the palace every time that ghostly shot is heard? This is St James's Palace, built by King Henry VIII in 1532, right next door to his newly formed deer park in the centre of London. And St James's has a ghost of its own in the royal apartments. We even know the name of the ghost. His name is Celis. He was a valet of the Duke of Cumberland, fifth son of King George III. And legend has it that the Duke of Cumberland was seducing Salis's teenage daughter. Salis launched a frenzied attack at the Duke and then rushed off, and in desperation committed suicide by cutting his throat. His ghost has been seen wandering around the place with his head lolling to one side, with a huge gash at the side of the throat. The Duke of Cumberland soon after that, about 1810, was sent off to fight in the Napoleonic Wars, but Salis stayed at home to haunt the apartments to this very day. I'm literally walking past the tomb of Mary, Queen of Scots. On the ghost tour, of course, we've visited many sites where Mary's been alleged to haunt, but here is where she's actually buried, very, very close to Queen Elizabeth. But there is also a story of a monk here at Westminster Abbey. His name is Benedictus, and he was killed by robbers in 1309, and his cowled figure still wanders around the cloisters here at Westminster Abbey. And a much later ghost, that of a soldier in First World War costume, often seen by the grave of the unknown soldier. They think that actually could be the ghost of the unknown soldier himself, still haunting the Abbey to this very day. I'm strolling in the cloisters of Westminster Abbey, approaching the very first part of the Abbey, the oldest bit. the Pick's Chamber or Pick's Chapel. Inside here, this is more than 1,000 years old. Pix is an old word, a Greek word, for the area where they kept the treasure. And it was this treasure that Father Benedictus was trying to defend when he was brutally murdered here in 1309, and his ghost still wanders around this area and these cloisters. But he's always seen with the hem of his robes above the floor, because over many hundreds of years the floor level here at Westminster Abbey has actually sunk, but he's seen in exactly the same position with his feet above the floor. This is very much to do with the business of being headless, legless, and ghosts walking through the walls, because I believe that what we're seeing here is not actually the ghost of Father Benedictus, but a recording of his death, made moments before he died. The energy used by him in resisting death has caused that event, moments before his death, to be recorded into the stonework of this ancient cathedral or abbey here in the centre of London. And on the anniversary of his death, or when the atmosphere is similar, the recording of his death is seen or replayed over and over again. And just across Westminster Bridge, on the other side of the river, in St Thomas's Hospital. And of course, all hospitals have to be haunted, because although they do wonderful work, of course, many people do die in them. There have been many stories of ghosts here at St Thomas's, but the most famous is the Grey Lady, seen even to this day, still haunting the old Victorian corridors here at St Thomas's. And of course this place was started by Florence Nightingale after she came back from the Crimean War. She started a nurses' hospital here, and I'm actually inside the Florence Nightingale Museum. This Grey Lady that's been seen on many occasions could be a nurse, could be a sister, but of course she's always wearing a grey Victorian nurse's costume, and most people say that it is the ghost of Florence Nightingale, still haunting the place that she started and that she loved so much. On one occasion, a sister in one of the old Victorian wards saw this Grey Lady walking towards the doors. The sister, of course, didn't think it was a ghost. She believed it to be a real person, as most people do. It's only when ghosts do something strange, like vaporising, walking through the wall, disappearing, being headless or legless, that people realise it's a ghost. She actually went up to the figure and asked if she could help, and the Grey Lady just disappeared through the wall. Now, Daphne, you are, although you're in Florence Nightingale Museum now, well, are you a receptionist here or
no,
volunteer?
I'm a volunteer coordinator.
Oh, I see. But you were a sister?
I trained in the Nightingale School 50 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
In March.
Right.
So, March 1952, I actually started my training.
Here at St Thomas's?
Here at St Thomas's.
Wow.
And I can't remember, it was probably about 1957, I think,
yeah,
that I was acting as night sister. And we were walking down to the mortuary chapel, which was at the far end of the hospital.
Yes, the old Victorian part,
of course. The old Victorian part, under a very dark corridor.
Mm-hmm.
And as we went down, there was a fleeting figure in front of me, which vanished as soon as we got near.
Really? So
yes,
it wasn't a person that you could see round the corner?
It
or
wasn't a person that I could know.
Really?
No.
So,
but it was just a grey, fleeting figure.
So for all you know, you have seen the Grey Lady of St Thomas's?
Well, yes, there are certainly other people who'd seen her in the wards, and mostly at night.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But I personally didn't.
Really? Fantastic.
Tuesday.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And of course, London's underground is dreadfully haunted. This was used as air raid shelters during the Blitz in the Second World War. The number of accidents that, of course, and deaths that were caused while it was being built, and of course the number of suicides that have taken place over the years, means that of all of London, the underground is as haunted as anywhere, and here at the Elephant and Castle, very, very haunted, lots of ghost stories. There is a story of a white lady that wanders around the platforms late at night. Even when the place is completely closed down, they hear footsteps, people hear screams, phantom tappings, and sounds of doors opening and closing, even when the place is completely secure. And here, a driver of the tube actually reported seeing a ghost, and this is a copy of a letter written by him after his strange sighting here. It was around 6 in the evening at a Bakerloo Line underground station about a week ago. I was in pursuit of my duties as an employee of London Underground, Northern Line. So I joined the train at the terminus at the Elephant and Castle and walked to the front of the train with a view to travelling with the driver. At this point, the driver had not arrived, and so I put my bag down and moved to the rear door to wait for him. While I was waiting, a girl gets into the carriage, dressed in white. She walks straight through the carriage, and I had to move aside, making some muttered apology. I sort of have to do this, since I am in uniform. A minute or so later, the driver turns up, and we moved towards the front of the train, when I noticed that the girl was no longer in the carriage. It was rather immediate concern for both of us. She could not have left the train without passing us. I had full view of the carriage and platform at the time. My reaction was to inform the driver. The only place she could have gone was to have walked down the tunnel. Not really what we wanted. The driver's response was unusual, to say the least. He said, "Oh, her? We hear about her all the time. She's even been in the newspapers." And the driver's reply, "Lovely. My first real ghost story is a media celebrity." And of course, yet another story to do with the Bank of England underground station. The ghost of a girl called Sarah Whitehead. Strange, strange story of execution. She still haunts the platforms of that underground station. She also haunts the area around the Bank of England to this day. And that's where we're heading now. I'm walking down the steps of the Royal Exchange. They've been trading here since 1571. The taxi driver told us on the way here that there are ghosts in the cellars. But I haven't come for that ghost. I've come for the ghost of Sarah Whiteman, the Black Nun of Threadneedle Street. She still haunts the Bank of England to this day. Her brother worked at the bank. He was a forger, and he was hanged for forgery in 1811, because like so many other cases, forgery was a hanging offence. Sarah used to come and meet her brother every day from work, and the hanging, of course, sent her slightly insane. And after the event, she continued every night to come and visit the front doors here of the bank, but unfortunately her brother was no longer there. She continued doing it from 1811 until 1836, when she finally died. And they say that her ghost, dressed in black Regency velvet, a long flowing dress, still haunts the Bank of England to this very day. There is also another ghost inside the bank. In olden times, they had a man working there who was nearly 8 feet high, and he was terrified of being dug up after his death by resurrectionists so that his body could be studied and his skeleton preserved. And in his will, he had it put that he would be buried within the precincts of the Bank of England. And not that many years ago, when workmen were digging in the cellars, they found an 8-foot long mahogany coffin under the floors of the cellars, with chains around the coffin, and the chains were actually secured in the ground to stop that man from being dug up. And his ghost also still haunts the bank. But I've just been in and asked them, and they said that they haven't seen him for many years. And there's yet another white lady here in the centre of London, almost next door to Buckingham Palace. This is Wellington Barracks, home of the Guards. And in 1870, a guardsman had a domestic. He killed his wife and secreted her body away from their living quarters, across the road, across the Mall, and behind Queen Victoria's statue, somewhere in St James's Park, he buried her in an unmarked grave. Many people, usually at night, usually when there's not a lot of traffic, have seen the ghost of that unfortunate woman wandering backwards and forwards across the Mall between St James's Park and Wellington Barracks. She stands sometimes in the road and points longingly towards St James's Park. I presume what she's trying to do is to make people aware of where her unknown grave is, so that she can be given a decent burial in consecrated ground, and thus lay her tormented soul to rest. One of the best documented and well authenticated royal ghost stories is from here, Kensington Palace. Queen Victoria was born here, and on October the 25th, 1760, King George II died here. His ghost has been seen on many occasions peering out of the bedroom window of his state apartment. He was dying, and his ashen face has often been seen looking forlornly through the windows towards the weather vane, which is still on top of the stables to this day. He was waiting for a message coming from Hanover, and he was looking at the weather vane to see if there would be favourable trade winds to bring the ship with that important message. Unfortunately, he never received it, because he died the day before the message came. And his ghost still wanders around Kensington Palace, and people can often hear the pathetic words of a dying king in broken English, muttering the words, "Why don't they come? Why don't they come?" I'm walking underneath one of the most famous landmarks in the centre of London. This is Marble Arch. This was originally the main entrance into Buckingham Palace. When the palace was extended, this wonderful archway was moved here in 1841, but it stands on a very notorious site. Just to the left of here, on the junction of the Bayswater Road and Edgware Road, stood the Tyburn Tree, the place where all the public executions, the hangings, took place here in London. And from the year 1800, there were well over 200 hanging offences in this country. You could be hanged for anything and everything, from stealing a sheep, stealing a horse, breaking down riverbanks, cutting down trees, setting fire to haystacks, and robbery. And so the amount of poor unfortunates, men, women and children, who were hanged near this spot is the reason that Marble Arch is as haunted as it is. The prison that they came from was Newgate, which stands on the site of the Old Bailey. They were loaded into a wagon or a cart and brought along Oxford Street, as it's called now. It was originally called Tyburn Road. All the executions were public. There were 8 hanging days a year, so all the shops and everyone closed down to come and watch the public execution. When the persons arrived here, crammed into the cart, they entertained the crowd. A couple of hymns, a psalm, their confession. So many people in London were destined to be hanged that the Tyburn Tree had to be made into what was known as the Triple Tree, which were 3 gallows put together in the shape of a triangle, so a cart could be positioned underneath each of the 3 gallows with 3 horses, and the people, sometimes 5 in a cart with ropes round their neck, waiting for someone to hit the backside of the horses. The horses drew away and they were launched into eternity, dying of slow strangulation, kicking, writhing, choking, vomiting and urinating, until sometimes the executioner would either be up the scaffold waiting and push down on their shoulders to strangle them quicker, or this is where the saying "pull the other leg" comes from. The executioner or his assistant would grab hold of their legs and pull down, thus extinguishing life. They would then be put into a humble coffin and taken away, either to be buried in the precincts of the jail, or in the case of murderers, either dissected publicly or gibbeted. That's hung up 30 foot high in a gibbet cage to rot, with the crows pecking at their flesh and their eyes. And so you can imagine why this place here is haunted, and the number of sightings of people here, girls dressed in white and men with ropes around their neck, wandering around the area, but especially in the tunnels underneath. Just around here, a policeman one day early morning was walking across this area, and he saw a figure walking towards him, dressed in an 18th century coat, but he'd got a white cap, or as he said, a bag on his head. He wondered what on earth he was doing, whether he'd been to a fancy dress party. And then the figure just disappeared into thin air. What, of course, he'd seen was one of those executed people, because before an execution took place, a white cap was always pulled down over their face to cover up the hideous contortions of the face during death. I'm standing a stone's throw from Marble Arch, from Tyburn, where the hangings took place. I'm standing in front of the Mason's Arms, a very, very old public house. This is the actual place where the saying, "I'm on the wagon," comes from. What in fact happened was, on the way from the jail to the gallows, this being public of course, thousands of people watching the cart or the wagon coming along the road, every time they came to a pub, the weight of people, the crowd, actually caused the wagon to stop, and usually the condemned would either climb down, or the landlord or landlady would send out a complimentary pint of beer or wine. They would drink that, and of course by the time they got to the scaffold they were probably so drunk that it didn't bother them too much. But the last pub on the way, and this was the last pub, after this place, no more beer, I'm on the wagon. There's a sign outside here that says, "The Mason's Arms situate on the site of the dungeons where prisoners were held before their hanging. A tunnel ran from the dungeons to Marble Arch but was sealed up. The dungeons are today's pub cellar and are believed to be haunted by their earlier inhabitants, many of whom plotted abortive last-minute escapes from the tree." Here, the fittings for the unfortunate prisoners' manacles can still be seen on the cellar walls. I think we'd better go in, go down inside and see what we can find. I know it's down here because I've been in and done a recce. Down the old wooden stairs, down into the depths, into the bowels of the old building. All quite white, modern, health and safety of course around here. Breeze blocks, it's getting older. Brickwork now down here, and it's getting slightly darker. And here, the old original barrel vaulted archway. And this is the part they told me about. The old original bit. And here, it's been pointed out to me already, the original holes where the manacles were, that they actually held some of the prisoners here before taking them on to Tyburn. Now of course most of the people would have been conveyed in a cart, but they tell me that here is the original part that was only bricked up about 20 years ago, and they tell me that this literally runs all the way through, I can't see through, all the way through to Marble Arch. And of course, with that huge amount of people waiting, you can probably understand why on certain occasions they actually used to take them underground in a tunnel to the gallows to avoid that huge crush of people. Many ghost stories to do with the building. A ghostly figure of a man has been seen wandering around here. The staff don't like coming down here alone at night. Glasses move and sometimes blow up. And often down here, when they think that the beer has run out, they say, go and change the barrel. The staff don't go alone. Two of them come down, just to find that phantom hands have actually turned off the gas. And in fact, there's plenty of beer still in the barrels. The Tower of London. Probably the most haunted castle in the world, and certainly the most haunted building in Great Britain. Built by William the Conqueror, and over the past 800 years there have been more reported sightings of spectres walking along the ramparts of this building than certainly anywhere else in this country. And a good place to start at the tower, here at St Thomas's Tower. His ghost was first seen 71 years after he was murdered at Canterbury Cathedral. The ghost of St Thomas à Becket appeared when they were extending the walls. He didn't like the idea, and every time they tried to build the walls up here, his spectre was seen hammering on the walls with a large wooden cross. A flash of lightning appeared and down came the walls. It wasn't until they decided to name the tower St Thomas's Tower that the ghost disappeared and has never been seen again. Along here a little farther, underneath the tower, Traitor's Gate. This was the entrance from the River Thames, and all the traitors were brought by boat along here through Traitor's Gate to await their fate inside. And just round the back of Traitor's Gate, many traitors during the Second World War, spies, were lined up against the wall and shot. And one ghost has been seen on many occasions of a man wearing a 1930s style pinstripe suit, standing up against the wall and then just fading away as if he'd disappeared backwards into the stonework. And standing here in the middle of the Tower of London, there are so many ghost stories that this would fill a video. Where do I begin? Probably the first story is over here, the Bloody Tower. In 1483, the two princes, Prince Edward and the Duke of York, were murdered by their uncle, Richard III, and buried beneath the steps of that tower. Many, many people see the ghosts of those two poor, unfortunate boys. And just to the right of it, the little walkway, known as Raleigh's Walkway. Sir Walter Raleigh was imprisoned here and was executed for high treason in a plot to do with Arbella Stewart, who was planning to overthrow King James I of Great Britain. Over here in front of me, the site of the scaffold. The number of beheadings that took place here, including Anne Boleyn, second wife of King Henry VIII and mother of Queen Elizabeth. She's been seen on many occasions, and once at night a guardsman who was on sentry duty saw a figure in a brown Elizabethan costume walking towards him. As it got closer, he noticed that it had got no face, and he actually lunged at the spectre with his bayonet. The bayonet went right through the spectre and he fainted and was found by the Sergeant Major and was court-martialed for being asleep on duty. It was only later, when he told his story, that they realised that in fact what it was the ghost of Anne Boleyn. Also here, the ghost of Margaret Pole, Duchess of Salisbury. She was 70 years of age, and the king really wanted her son, Cardinal Pole, but he settled for her. She ran away from the executioner and he chased her round and round the block, swinging at her with his large axe, eventually cutting into the side of her throat. She collapsed to the floor. He dragged her to the scaffold, laid her on the scaffold, and finished the job off by severing her neck. That was the 5th blow of his axe. And her ghost, like so many others, still wander around the Tower of London to this day. But I'm here on the top of Tower Hill, and even more executions took place just over here. So let's go and have a look. And I'm now heading towards the actual site of, as it says here, site of the ancient scaffold. This is where many, many executions took place outside the Tower of London. Burnings, hangings, beheadings, and hanging, drawing and quarterings all took place on this very spot. Hanging, drawing and quartering was introduced by King Edward I for William Wallace when he was executed at Smithfield. It was the most horrendous sentence anyone could possibly imagine. You were hanged for 3 minutes, but taken down while you were still alive. Your privy parts cut off and burnt before your eyes. Your bowels and entrails ripped out of your belly and also burnt. Your head then severed from your body, and your body divided into 4 equal quarters. This was done here to James Radcliffe, 3rd Earl of Derwentwater, in 1716. The plaque says, to commemorate the tragic history and in many cases the martyrdom of those who for their sake of their faith, country or ideals staked their lives and lost. On this site more than 125 were put to death, the names of some of whom are recorded here. And the last one on the list, Simon Fraser, Lord Lovat, 1747, after Bonnie Prince Charlie's failed attempt to regain the throne of England. Many executions took place. Simon Fraser was in his 80s and was very fat, and his head was disappearing into his shoulders. He had no neck, and he petitioned King George II to hang him instead of behead him, because he was frightened to death of the axeman making a bad job of it. The king wouldn't allow it. He was brought here to be beheaded. He laid his head on the block, and the executioner took off his head with one blow, the axe biting 2 inches into the block. No wonder there are so many stories of ghosts and hauntings around this area. One story dating back to the Second World War was of a soldier on sentry duty. He was half asleep, but was soon woken when he heard a ghostly drumbeat. He opened his eyes and saw a spectral procession passing in front of this place, drums beating, priests and men-at-arms. They were carrying a stretcher, and on that stretcher was the figure of a man, his head in the crook of his arm, with blood dripping both from his severed neck and from the head. They passed down towards the tower and disappeared. And what that man believes he saw was a replay of one of the many executions that took place here on this very spot. I'm sitting on a very famous spot, a very haunted area to say the least. Between August and November 1888, Jack the Ripper was abroad around here. Out of 140 suspects, it is believed that he could well have been a Polish Jew called Aaron Kosminski. But of course, he was never caught and he was never executed. He'd already murdered one girl that night. He murdered Elizabeth Stride in Berners Street, but he was disturbed and he only had time to slit her throat from ear to ear. And then he came down here to Mitre Square and he murdered Catherine Eddowes, literally on this spot where this planter is now. He cut her throat, he disemboweled her, ripped out her insides and cut most of her face away so she was almost unrecognisable, and her body was found here, where this planter is now. And on many, many occasions, a ghostly figure has been seen in this square, more or less where this planter is now, lying on its side, quivering and shaking, with a sort of halo, a glow around it. And as people, including policemen, who have been brought to the body here, as they got close to it, it just vaporised. This, to say the least, is a bit of a scoop. I am actually in the middle of Highgate Cemetery. This was the first municipal cemetery to be created in this country in 1839 and was consecrated by no less than the Bishop of London. Before 1839, graveyards of churches in this country were absolutely crammed full of bodies. People were fed up of two things. One, of their loved ones being dug up by resurrectionists or grave robbers and then sold to doctors for dissection for up to 2 guineas a time. The other problem was the overcrowding in the churchyards. And in fact, if a grave had been there for 5 years, someone would then come along and open it while the loved ones were actually standing around the grave. The sexton would dig down, and if the coffin had crumbled and collapsed and the body was in a state of semi-decay, they would then stamp on the bones, crush them into the ground, and then another coffin would be put on top. In other circumstances, if the coffin was still intact, it would be lifted out of the graveyard. The decomposing body would be taken out and again stamped into the ground and covered by a little bit of soil. Then the new coffin would be put down. This was not acceptable for people, and so this cemetery, with railings all the way round, was created here in 1839. I have never been so surrounded by dead people as I am here. And of course there are lots of ghost stories. There's a figure in a black cloak that stands by the north gate. It has long pointed fingernails and beckons towards people that are walking down Swains Lane. There is also an old lady, a mad woman, a murderess, that has been seen wandering around this graveyard, looking longingly at the names of the children's graves that are here. Apparently she was a child murderer, and she's looking at the names of the children that she murdered here. Charles Dickens is buried here, Karl Marx is buried here, and many, many famous people, murderers, politicians and stars, all buried here in Highgate Cemetery. There is also a story of a vampire, and people walking along Swains Lane looking through the north gate have seen a larger-than-life figure dressed in black with an ashen face and fangs and blood dripping from those fangs coming up out of the ground of one of the large tombs. On frequent occasions people have actually broken in here and have gone down into the tombs, and on one occasion someone broke in and found in the catacomb 3 coffins, one of them with the lid open, and the coffin was empty. I've decided it's time to leave Highgate Cemetery. This is the only way for me in or out, and I've decided to leave before it gets dark. And we're now at the gateway to London, Highgate. The old toll gate, of course, was here, and this pub, the Gatehouse, has been here certainly since 1337. Now, Joe, you're the landlady. You've not been here that long, of course. You've got ghosts in the pub, I believe.
Yes, we have one actually in the pub and one in the theatre that's attached to the pub as well.
Right, now this theatre part apparently has been here certainly since 1895, but it's still open as a theatre today, is that right?
Yes.
And what happens in there?
The ghost or...
Yeah, yes, the ghost, really, yeah. Obviously, there's plays and theatres.
Yeah. Apparently, I was told by John Pluce, who's the manager of upstairs, that a lady called Mrs. Morse was hung here for committing a murder that she didn't commit.
I see.
So she can be seen in the rehearsals rooms upstairs, actually walking across the floor. But the floors have been raised since she was killed, and so you can only see her from the waist up.
Oh yeah, you get an awful lot of that, basically cut off at the knee or something like that because the floor... Yeah. So it sounds as if she could well be, rather than a ghost, but actually a recording of something that happened, which means she always appears in the same spot, hence the fact that the floor tends to chop her off. Now, that theatre apparently was also courtrooms at one time or another, and we're actually, or were, on the boundaries of actual London town and Middlesex. And is this true? There used to be a rope that went through the middle of the courtroom apparently, so people in London would be tried on one side and people from Middlesex would be tried on the other side, and that is actually that place up there. There's also apparently a story of an American walking past here on the pavement one evening, saw a face at one of the windows looking out at him, a horrible sort of grey figure. The following morning when he came back, the same window apparently was completely blocked out. No one could see in or out. I wonder, because obviously that's long gone, because the building has been changed a lot, hasn't it? Now there was also an archway apparently, which people came through, because this was the Drovers' Road. That's true, isn't it? And this part was the stables, and the drovers used to leave their cattle apparently around here the night before going down into London and into Smithfield. And the actual Gatehouse was joined on to this place in some way. But you've got, of course, more stories inside, I believe. Problems with the cellars?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can we go in and have a look? Oh, that's great. Okay, let's go and have a look. And so this is the way down to obviously the cellars, Joe, and this is where you've had, for want of a better word, ghostly experiences.
Yes.
Yeah. Now this is quite amazing that I should come all the way from Derby to Highgate, because you actually come from Derby.
I do indeed.
That is just, well, there's something about that, isn't there, as well? So, I mean, it looks, you know, very clean and tidy and clinical, and not particularly the most ghostly place that you'd ever wish to go into, and yet things happen down here?
Yes, apparently the story of the ghost in the actual pub is one of the old landladies who found out that the landlord was having an affair with the barmaid.
Right.
And she killed the barmaid, and then the landlord killed the landlady. And she's supposed to occupy the drop cellar through there.
Which is this bit down here?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That was the drop, I presume, was it?
Yes.
Oh, I see. And so she, in here?
In here.
She's been seen in here?
Yes, I've seen her in here.
Really?
Myself, when I was changing the barrel over there and saw her walking across this section here.
Right. And she just, what, vanishes, disappears through the wall? Or,
Yeah,
or?
she just... I've actually seen her upstairs in one of the flats about a week after I moved in here.
Gosh,
And
that was
she
your
walked-
welcoming, obviously.
Yeah, she walked through one wall over the passageway and then into another wall.
Okay.
It's just a grey figure.
Yeah. She doesn't recognise, she doesn't acknowledge you, or nothing like that, of
No,
course. As far as you know, she knows you're not there.
Yeah, I've heard a whisper over in that section of the cellar one day when I was down here on my own.
Really? Can you show us? Is it the sort of place that people obviously don't like coming down on their own, I would imagine? Because
No, it can be a bit creepy.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's alright when there's folks with you.
Yeah, this is the boiler room in here,
Yeah.
which is a particularly scary room. And I was stood here one day. The pub was actually shut because we had a burst water main. So there's only me and my partner in the pub. And I came down to do a stock take, and I was counting bottles here and heard a whisper in my ear.
So she was right by you. Or was it a woman's voice? Or could you not tell from the whisper?
I couldn't really tell, to be honest. I couldn't make out any words, but there was definitely wasn't wind.
No, I can imagine. So you beat a hasty retreat?
I certainly did, yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's great. Joe, thanks very much indeed.
No problem.
Thank you. I'm standing on the site of a very famous murder. This is the site of number 39, Hilldrop Crescent, Kentish Town, London. It's now occupied by Margaret Bonfield House. The original house, was demolished, but the houses round it still look exactly the same as they did in 1910. Dr. Hawley Harvey Crippen murdered his wife Cora here, cut off her head, and her head was never found. He was having an affair with his secretary. His wife gave him a lot of grief. When his secretary finally had a miscarriage, it was the final straw. Crippen lost his temper with his wife and killed her on this site. He was tried at the Old Bailey and sentenced to hang. The judge placed a black cap on his head and said the following words: "You will be taken back from this place to the place from whence you came, and from there to a place of lawful execution, where you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead." Dr. Crippen replied, "Death has no terror for me." And he was hanged at Pentonville Jail in 1910. And his ghost still walks along this road. The night that he was executed, the 31st of January 1910, a gentleman was having a vigil outside the house, and he saw the figure of a man with a long drooping moustache come out of the house carrying a bundle under his arm. No one knows what that bundle was. The figure disappeared along the road towards the old pond, which has long since gone, and then returned without the bundle, went towards the house, never went in, and vaporized. No one to this day knows what that bundle was. But what do you think? The ghost of a man that had just been executed, carrying a round bundle, cut off his wife's head, and the head had never been found. I think that man saw the ghost of Dr. Crippen taking his wife's head to hide it forever.